Hey, so today we've got Kevin, who is a real estate executive with over 20 years of experience. He's a native New Yorker and graduate from Columbia University. He successfully implemented large-scale solutions for a leading financial services firm, higher education institutions, manufacturing companies. Wow, you've got a lot listed here. Lots and lots of things. Kevin specializes in real estate strategies, planning, program managers, project development, and facilities management. As a trusted advisor, Kevin has provided guidance and insight to clients in the areas of facility maintenance and repair, space management, project management, risk management, RE/FM system technologies, flexible work environment design, and performance analytics. Kevin is the Director of Real Estate Advisor Services at Process First. Welcome, new company, right?
Yeah.
The consulting service and a division of AWS Solutions. Scott works for AWS Solutions, partnered together. You guys do the same parent company?
Yeah, we're sister companies.
Sister companies, okay. Has served as global service delivery manager for a multinational financial firm before bringing an ISO-like concept of service delivering to facilities organizations. Scott has consulted with a number of Fortune 500 companies and federal agencies across industry verticals. He's an active member of the IFMA Technology Council. Does that have a
IFMA.
nicer word?
IFMA.
IFMA?
International Facility Management.
Say not one I'm familiar with. Adaptive Workplace Solution focuses on process improvement by introducing tools that improve financial and functional visibility across the organization. That's a lot of
That
words.
is a lot.
I should have
And my
crossed it
bio
out.
pales in comparison.
You got a lot of lists, but welcome. Hopefully we learned something and nobody gets shot, right?
I hope not. I hope
Let's
not.
play tic-tac-toe rather
Yeah,
than
yeah,
card
yeah.
practice.
So, special thanks to Steve and the Project Tech team for pulling this all together. I think they've done a phenomenal job. I think everything I've heard so far has been positive. For those people who are wondering, it's not that I lost track of what year we're in. That's up there on purpose. It's not that we're in 2015. Really, I just wanted to recap where we were last year and talk a little bit about what we're going to cover going forward and the synergy between there. So last year on the same stage, Adaptive Workplace Solutions, we were talking about how you can extend your Maximo implementations and tie it back to IBM's Tririga solution to give you a fuller view for decision support with regard to your facilities. So this is just a recap. I think our clicker's working.
Oh, I got you.
I don't think that's working either.
Not working at all.
Yeah.
This happened earlier. We had to get out and back in.
Ooh. Yeah, it's kind of. Maybe that stuff has
There we go.
purpose.
I think it's
Perfect.
the recording stuff.
Maybe.
No worries. So, there are two real main areas, just to recap, that the integration between Tririga and Maximo work together very well. The first area has to do with work management, facility assessment. So, basically, all your work orders that are being deferred within Maximo, you can tie those back into Tririga and manage things like your capital planning. You hear a lot of things about master planning. So the integration where you actually carry out the work or defer the work in Maximo remains there. However, on the Tririga side, you can do all your budgeting, forecasting, and build out your master plan. And then a lot to do with space and move management as well. So Tririga can help you manage those things from a project perspective, all the tasks that go into movement, and then on the Maximo side, actually execute those moves, carry them out, take a look and see where you stand within that long stack of moves in Tririga and manage that project and schedule going forward. So what do you get by integrating those two? First of all, there's a best of breed scenario. So Maximo is best of breed for maintenance, where Tririga is best of breed for your facilities basically all your facilities planning and your space management, and your decision support. So tying those two together will give you a best-of-breed solution altogether. You'll get better insight into your data, so you can see the impact against your facilities, your facility condition indices, your life and your expected life of your assets and those things, and then allow you to ultimately compare different scenarios. If you manage your real estate leases and contracts, you can decide, well, do we do repair versus replace? Do we abandon a building that we're leasing? Do we defer this all and put it as part of a program for later on? So that's all the decision support. And then over here, this is just sort of the process overview. So it's the assessment of what's going on and the analysis, and then ultimately the execution of those things in Maximo. And the same thing with the move planning. You would assess everything in TRIRIGA. You'd go through your occupancy vacancy information, their strategic facility planning. That's your repair to replace, analyze everything, and then again, execute all those moves back in Maximo. These are just a couple of slides to show you what some of the graphic sections looked like back in 2015 within TRIRIGA, and it's changed a bit since then. You'll get KPIs and metrics. If there's any interest in learning a little bit more about Maximo, we're not going to do a dive on this, but if you stop by our booth, I'm happy to show you. We can show you any of the things that Kevin's going to talk about as well, and I'm happy to show you how TRIRIGA can help you out. Okay, even with Maximo in place, TRIRIGA and your best-of-breed system, we talked a little bit about reporting, or I showed you some of those reports. It really is sort of just the tip of the iceberg, and that's the synergy with what we're going to talk about today. So I'll turn it over to you.
And I get the clicker. Let's go. All right. So I have a slightly different approach than probably what you've seen so far, although I'm assuming a little there. I'm not going to talk too much about product, but I will get into a conversation about Watson Analytics a little later. But we're here to talk about navigating strategy and operational execution. So what does that mean? A roadmap to better communication. It said analytics in the thing that you got in the mail or email. But analytics is just a better way to communicate. So what you often, the purpose of this analytics is to accommodate this better communication and provide faster answers to dynamic questions and to tell better stories that can inform business matters much more thoroughly than you can just through traditional reporting. So this is a table that we took from Bill Frank. He's a guy who writes about analytics. And essentially what he's saying is this looks at the difference between conventional reporting and the analytics as I'm talking about them. I'm going to read through it. What I want you guys to do is try to remember this a little bit. Later on when we get to a point where we're going to have some interactive discussion about it, I want you to try to determine what's what. So reporting provides data where analytics provides answers. That doesn't mean that reporting doesn't provide answers. Reporting provides what is asked for. Analytics provides what is needed. Reporting is typically standardized. Analytics is typically customized. Reporting does not involve a person. Analytics involves a person. Reporting is fairly inflexible, and analytics is extremely flexible. Now, some of those things are debatable, right? You know, there's a person involved in reporting, not necessarily. It can come to you by email, and then a person's not involved in it. But you push a button sometimes when you want to run a report. But it's the ability to get into the report and question the answer that you've been given and go deeper than that. That's what we're talking about today. So the roadmap part of it. So not exactly Google Maps, right? But there's 4 parts that I'm going to talk about, and this is a very generic discussion at this point. We're not going to talk right now about IBM Watson Analytics. We're going to talk about what is analytics for, and some of the steps along the process to having a successful analytics program. Analytics goes through these 4 steps. It's not a recipe that you're going to follow, and there are some other steps that are included which are a little more on the boring side, and it's the kind of thing I would do if you hired us to set up an analytics program for you. But that's not what it's about. It's about understanding more about what you do every day. And you do that through these steps: abstraction, analysis, synthesis, and communication. So that sounds pretty straightforward, right? Okay. So abstraction is our first step, right? And the first milestone is about the prospect of identifying your purpose, your goals, your vision. It seems like an activity that would clarify things, and often it is an activity like that, but the value proposition for measuring goal and understanding what the achievement of the program will yield is a very important thing that often gets confusing along the way. We suffer from an organizational indifference at times where, you know, we can't really tell what we don't yet know. And there's some examples of this that I'll bring up. But it's what we can't yet see that we're going to be talking about. Does anybody know what this is? I hang out with a lot of 10-year-olds, and that's actually true. But what this is an illustration out of a book called The Little Prince. And you're right, it is a snake and it's an elephant. But it's not identified that way in the book first. It's identified first as it's a hat, and then it's a snake, and then it's an elephant. And the point is that from different perspectives, you can get this different things from the same information that's put in front of you, basically. Okay, so now it's time for us to step into this target practice, or whatever you want to call it. This is this is your blind spot. So you're all going to need the piece of paper now that you were given when you came in. It's got a dot on one side and it's got a cross on the other side. I apologize for this will say an X where it should say cross, and I think it'll say an O where it should say. Okay, I'm going to read through these, and this is an instruction set for you to try to follow. Now, I said I hang out with a lot of 10-year-olds. I'm here to tell you, 10-year-olds are a lot better at this than you will be, because they are able to dispel their disbelief and just get into it. And what we're trying to do right now is find your blind spot. Everybody has a blind spot. So here are the instructions to finding your blind spot. Hold the paper in front of you with the cross to the right and the dot to the left, and close your right eye. Look at the cross. Even though you're looking at the cross, you should be able to see the dot out of the corner of your eye. Now slowly move the paper in front of you, trying to move it left or right or closer and farther until you get to the point where, and you have to remember, keep looking at the X, right? Until you get to a certain point and you will see the dot disappear. Now you have to keep trying to do this. You're going to move the paper around a lot. I can see some of you people aren't even trying. Well, part of the problem with our age instead of 10-year-olds is we can't see so well, but all right. So what actually happens, I'll explain it so that we can move forward, is that there is a physiological reason for this, that the area on your retina where the optic nerve connects can't actually see. And you get over this by stereoscopy. I'm blind in one of my eyes, so I never get over this entirely, right? But your brain will fill in the blind spot with stuff around the blind spot. So when it does that, when you hit that spot where that dot is right in your blind spot, it disappears because your brain takes everything that's around that area and just puts it right there. And what's around there is not the dot. So it's a substitution. We do the same thing. We fill in the blanks. We are naturally the kind of people that find patterns. Well, people are the kind of animal that finds patterns better than any other animal. And that's why we have, developed what we've developed and become as intelligent as we are. All right. So the second step is analysis, right? Once you know the goals, how do you set out to resolve them? Well, you guys do this every day, all the time anyway, right? You reduce problems into smaller problems that can be distributed, resolved, and later converge, right? We all do it. I mean, this is a basic tenet of project management, maintenance, right? You never try to tackle a problem where you're looking at a system-wide problem. You have to get down to the component that's broken, right? But we're searching for solutions to a strategic question, and the idea of getting into these weeds, operational data doesn't necessarily seem productive at first, right? We're diverting ourselves. I was asked a question maybe by my boss of, you know, next year I want you to cut your budget by 10%. How can you do that, right? You don't have a solution off the top of your hand for that, or if you do, then you're better than me. What you need to do is get into it and say, well, what's the relative importance of things? I need to put these things into choices that the executive can work from. And in order to do that, you have to get into the weeds. So this is a slightly different thing. This is impossible for people to see, but I'll talk about it a little bit in a way that maybe I can instruct you guys on it. But think of this as like a network diagram from your own LinkedIn or Facebook, whatever social networking you're in, right? And the question on this is, who's the most influential person on the page, right? So when I look at this, Valerie has 5 connections. Jorge has 7 connections. Jamie has 6 connections. Juan has 5 connections. Most of these other people have lower numbers than that. So, I mean, what do you think? I immediately think it's going to be Jorge. He has more connections than anybody else. But okay, great answer. You're exactly right. If you have a more efficient one step, then what you'd find out is Valerie, so we see Valerie has the same as Juan, but Valerie's one step away from every single person in her 18-person network, right? She actually has more influence over the group than anybody else. So if you can get Valerie, you can get everything else. What does that have to do with maintenance? Well, you know, you all manage people, whether you see it as a people management job and particularly what you do or some other, you know, if you're managing what you think is managing assets or what you think is managing information, is irrelevant. At the end of the day, the decisions that are made by the people. So when you start to think about how do I get better at managing projects or how do I get better at managing assets, it always comes down to your team. It doesn't come down to anything else. All right. Does anybody know what this is? We have, at least we have people in here that know rocket scientists. So that's a good thing. So this is a very famous report. Does anybody? Okay, good. All right, so we got one in the room who knew it. This is from 1986. It's the first page of the report circulated by Thiokol. They were a sub on the launch of the Challenger, and they were trying to get NASA administrators to call off the Challenger launch in January 1986, right? So if you look to the right on the page, there's a box. There's some codes in there. This is a little foggy from your distance probably, but I want everybody to try to remember what the codes are here, because this is essentially what they had to do with the administrators. This is the second page of the report. Now, on the second page of the report, what you'll see is a bunch of rockets. There's 2 rockets per launch. There's a temperature on one of the rockets, which shows what the temperature was at the time. Some of them have these dark splotches on them, and this is where I want you to remember what those codes were, right? Yeah, okay, I didn't think so. Here's how they're saying, well, you can't launch because, you know, look at the data. It's telling you not to launch, right? Well, this is an ineffective way to try to spread information because it doesn't tell the tale of what's my risk? Why shouldn't I do it? So you have a bunch of administrators in the room who are saying, wow, if I sign on to call this off, then somebody's going to roast me on that. I better not do that, right? Unless there's a really good reason why. Here's a really good reason why. you see a cluster of data. The original data on the bottom end wasn't on that other chart. So the only dots that you saw were the ones at 1, 2, and 3 on the right-hand margin there. All the ones at 0 were not included. But by including those, and then by setting it where you can look at the temperature that you're going on the bottom axis that you're going to launch on and the number of defects on the vertical axis, you can look at that very clearly from where you're sitting, even though it's not so close, and see, I didn't have a single launch under 65 degrees that didn't have a flaw in it. So under 65 degrees seems like a warning to me, right? Now, the green line, this is the temperature on the day that they're going to launch, right? And they knew this a few days in advance, and they were trying to clamor to get everybody to not launch that day. It's very clear that the number of defects is going up as the temperature goes down. It's not perfectly clear because I have this anomaly over here. What's that noise? But that's all it is. It's noise. You know, this is an experimentation process. It's not perfect. And things go wrong. One defect that's an anomaly you can discard. I can clearly see a trend. And I would not recommend that we launch. And if I do recommend that we launch, well, sorry. We kind of know what happened the next day, right? All right. Third step on the map, synthesis. This is where we bring everything together. There's many different types of information. There's different tools. There's other differences from abstraction and analysis and convergence. And all of that equals what you have to do in a modeling context. So when you're modeling, you're going through some steps. What I'm refining my modeling with here is I'm going through a discovery process, right? I'm going through an association process. This is connections and relationships in my data. This is looking for those patterns that we are biologically the best of all the species at doing, right? And then refining that by improving it. What does refinement mean? It usually means removing the noise. Take the noise out of it so that you can see the signal that you're trying to get across, right? You know, and from left to right on the bottom, you know, you're going to start definitely with the information that's your own. So that eigenvector centrality chart that I put up there, it's learning information about what you already know. You already know how many connections you have. You probably already know how many connections all of your people in your social map have. But you probably never asked the question of who's the most influential person in my network before. I don't expect that people will go home and try to figure that out, but if your boss asks you to figure something like that out, it's a context, and you start with your internal information. You move on to external information. You're filling in your own blind spot. And the way that you fill in that blind spot is you bring in as much contextual information as you can that can give you a slightly different view, change your perspective. Sometimes that'll be finance information, HR information, whatever, right? And you're going to put that in conjunction with the information that you already have. Often it's also information just from another silo right next to yours. You get their data set, you compare it to yours, you learn things about your own data set. And then ultimately, you may go out to the street and say, what are my benchmarks? You know, how do I compare to the rest of the world? Leadership is really interested in benchmarks. I find that benchmarks are really, you know, kind of only as good as the process that makes them. So if you have a good benchmark institution, then you can get some really good information, and I know one or two of those. And then there's a whole lot of sausage factories out there, and like the process of making that stuff is pretty ugly. All right. So from there, modeling tools is the next step. This is still within synthesis, but it's important to point out some of the really boring stuff. You have to be connectable with your data sources. You have to be able to make associations between your data sources. The application that you choose to use for your modeling has to be very usable, because that actually creates the environment for experimentation, and the experimentation is where you notice the patterns. And then ultimately, the more self-documenting it is, the less work there is for you to do. Anybody who's a developer in here and has developed things within, like customizations within Maximo, you know that, going back and having to document all of that stuff is a whole nother job in its process. So if you could have a tool that's going to follow every process that you're doing through your modeling, discount the things that you're discarding, and contain and keep the things that you're, as documentation, that you're actually succeeding on, then you get to the end and you've assembled something that you can reuse. All right, what packages can do this? There's a lot of packages that could do this, I like IBM's tools, so, and I'm not getting paid to say this, but I think Watson Analytics is a great place to start. The reason I say that is because, first, it's free. It's been out there for a year, guys. I don't think you guys are going out and trying to use it. And I challenge everybody in here to take a data set that you already know and drop it into analytics. It's just an easy process to do. Sign up takes about 3 minutes. When you get inside of it, what you'll find is something that is peculiar at first, but once you get comfortable with it, you'll start to find things within your own data that you didn't recognize before, especially if you can bring in more data. Now, is that the only one, Watson Analytics? No. If you were going to be looking at forensic criminal investigations, I would suggest a different package like I2. Or if you were going to get into really hardcore predictive analytics, I would say SAS or SPSS are the kinds of things that you would want to use for that. So, and some of you in here, if you're doing a lot of, detailed reads off of instrumentation, you have a ton of data, you're going to want to use something like that maybe in conjunction with Watson Analytics. Watson can do a lot, and it can do even more when you put it in combination with one of those specialized tools for that kind of a purpose. But the point is that it doesn't matter about the analytics package as long as it has some of those basic principles. It's flexible enough for you to experiment in. You can connect it easily and quickly to the sources of data that you need to, or you have a workaround for that. And then ultimately, it's robust enough to keep whatever you're doing so that you don't have to repeat those steps over and over again. Because I'll tell you, if you're like me, you spent 10, 15 years being an Excel genius. And there's nothing worse than being the Excel genius because everybody wants you to do their job for them. All right. So I chose to talk a little bit about Watson Analytics, and you'll see a lot more of this when Pam Denny gives her thing tomorrow. And there's several different people who are looking at this, obviously, in different verticals. Pam, I think, is focused on IoT from the perspective of how it combines with Maximo with Watson, and that's a good thing. We have some data. I don't have the full data set yet for this at my table, but I can show you, I can get through some of the facility stuff. We can look at some of the other information that we have from Tririga and whatnot, but their representation, IBM's that is, of this flexible set of tools is to go through a couple of different steps. They have exploring and predicting and assembling. Those are the three we're going to go through, and there's another one called refinement. There's a couple of things on here which are not mentioned, like, how do you load data, for instance. Loading data is really simple. I mean, it's as simple as this. It's a little bit more complicated, but this is really the only two things that you get on the free version. There's a little more that you can do to create permanent connections if you have an enterprise version of it. By the way, enterprise versions are cheap too. I thought I might mention this. You can go between maybe 35 to about a little over 100, depending on the choices per month to use this tool on a monthly basis. Now that sounds, 100 might sound like a lot, but $1,200, I spend $4,000 on some of the desktop tools that I use. I don't do that every year, but I think the things are coming down in cost is what I'm saying. And so you compare some of the ones that are rich clients to some of the ones that are subscription, and the subscription makes sense, nowadays. So after you've dropped your data onto it, you're going to go into what they refer to as an explore. So this is where you get to ask questions and kind of interact directly with and do some discovery in your own data set. And this is tedious at first, but I think it helps you to think about how do I interact with the tool as well as the data and help to guide Watson to make good decisions. But you can literally just type questions in about your data and get answers. So here's an example. This question is, what is the contribution of total maintenance cost over year and the year is being taken from the warranty expiration date and by country. And this is something Pam will probably show you too. It shows a huge spike in China, so maybe you want to look at that more. So after some drilling, I'm not going to show you every step because this is not a demo. After some drilling, you can bring in some other dimensions like country and downtime and find downtime as a root cause for that cost. And then you can find, well, yep, I'm still seeing the same trend here. The darkest ink spot on my page is China. Then there's a question that you're going to do in prediction. Now, you can bounce back and forth between these tools. So that's what's interesting about it. When you're predicting, you're looking for insights or hidden things that you haven't seen before. So this is where, and when you first look at this, if you're like me, you look at it and you see this target in the middle and these colored dots. And I'm like, what's all that about? I've pasted on these things because I'm not doing something interactive, but I'm happy to show you this stuff if you come by our booth. The weighting elements here are, you know, how good is the likelihood that there's a correlation between, you know, what I'm looking for, total downtime, and other metrics on here. And I've got 100, I've got 99, I've got 94.9. But these ones over here, if we actually went through and looked at them, they're all obvious ones. And this is the problem when you get into a room with someone who's talking about Watson Analytics. They're going to show you things you already know, right? This isn't going to inform anybody who's an expert in their own area. But the other one on the other side is a composite. And so my original weight on that was 66.7%. So that's not a good correlation at all. But when I add one data element to it, it brought it up to a 98.2%, and this had to do with the delivery of materials. And so now I'm finding that, hey, my downtime has a direct correlation with whether or not I'm getting my materials on time. That might be actually an insight, right? Because you might not have put those two things together. Now somebody did, but it might not have gotten back to you. All right. Fourth step, communication. So this is our last step, and you know, we've been on the road to communication all this way. Everything that we do has to do with how well we can communicate what needs to be communicated. You know, over the years we've called this different things. Some people call it decision support. Some people call it, you know, strategic management. There's a lot of, you know, everybody had another version of a dashboard. But the fundamental is you want to be able to gather information that can show real insights and show the value of what you're doing. So this, what I'm talking about in this particular slide is, you know, communicating 5 specific things: comparisons, compositional ideas, statistical distributions, relationships and activities or outcomes, and geospatial distributions, which are the same thing as statistical distributions, but nowadays we like maps. So we're back to Google Maps again. But how do you decide personally what's my best way to show this stuff? So if I pick the wrong tool when I was looking at that list of logos, I may have a very tedious process on my hands where it's difficult for me to move from one to another. This you would have to see close up. And you know, we can actually distribute it. This is not my work, this is work that's been published. And what it's showing is these are the relationships, the comparisons, the distributions, the compositions, right? And different types of charts and what they're good at showing. So I can tell you that I have some personal preferences. For instance, it's saying down here that I could use a 3D axis chart, or whatever they call that, which I don't like to show a 3-dimensional distribution. But if I show a 3-dimensional bubble chart, I actually like that one better, right? Because on a bubble chart, I can throw a threshold in the vertical, I can throw a threshold in the horizontal, I can say, you know, well, this is our tolerance, and that's our other tolerance. And I can start to say, these are the groupings of what we need to work on, these are things we can hold on, these are things we have to schedule but we don't have to work on yet, and these are things we can ignore, right? And I like that kind of chart. I want to get you guys to the point where you're thinking about not just, what do I have to do every day, but how do I get better at doing it? And how do I communicate that we're not getting better at doing it the way that we're doing things today. And if you can use a free tool to get better at that, all the better. All right, another game. You might know this. I stole this from the internet. I don't know what this game is, but I just used it to say that we're about to do a guessing game. Reporting or analytics? Right. Reporting or analytics? Various details. Reporting or analytics? KPIs. Still reporting. We can debate on these things. There's definitely some room for why you might think that's analytics, but it's not interactive enough for it to be analytical. Reporting or analytics? Energy consumption by block. Reporting. Reporting or analytics? Fastest route. Analytics. But wait. It's analytics, but this analytics is done in packages that cost an average of, I don't know, anywhere from $900 to like $20,000. Subscription price on these things can be thousands of dollars per month if you have big, enterprise size subscriptions. So the expertise that somebody needs and the difficulty of putting this thing together, it's not as simple as what you guys are doing if you're running through something in Tableau mapping or in Watson Analytics. So the problem is it's not accessible, right? So I would maybe even say, yeah, it's analytics, but because I can't get it out there and let people interact with it, I've turned it into a report, So this is the last slide for that, but I want to go back through you guys did very well on that, by the way, and we'll go right through this again. Reporting provides data, provides what's asked for and nothing else, is typically standardized. It has to be because it goes through IT, right? Does not involve a person, is fairly inflexible. Analytics provides answers, provides what's needed. It's typically customized because you're customizing it as you make it. It includes a person, and that would be you or whoever your analyst is who's actually going to be manipulating and managing the data. And it's extremely flexible. So this is the time for you guys to actually experiment a little bit. So I'll show you the last bit in Watson. I didn't show you the assemble piece until we went through our guessing game. So in assembling, it's a slightly different viewpoint here. After you've gone through and made observations and experimented a lot with your information, then you have to say, what's going to communicate my piece most effectively to management. And that's a different process. And that's really like compositing, if you've worked in either, advertising agencies or if you've worked in an architecture firm. I'm an architect, so I've done some of this before. You're getting ready for a jury. People are going to judge you on what your outcome is. You better make sure that you bring the right notions. In other words, which questions were asked that I need to have answers to, which questions were not asked that I better have answers to too, and get that into your format. Now, if you did it well, what you wind up with is these explorations and infographics that you made in the earlier steps, and you're compositing them in a way where they can be interacted with somewhat. This is more of a report assembling than it is an interactive analysis, and that's because, why is that? Does anybody know? What happens if you take an analytics program and you try to get the SVP in your division to log into it? That doesn't happen, right? So you really need to have a way to get it to leadership as well, and so the way to get it to the leadership is to have a paste-up board, which is already in there. It's called the assemble component. All right, one more. Caveats. Well, I didn't talk about this because it's actually the most boring stuff that we do, but it's really, really important that I mention that there's a lot of plumbing and architecture to doing this stuff. So not necessarily Watson Analytics in particular, but there's a lot that you're going to do to prepare for that. So you have to communicate with other people, you have to get their data sets, and doing that in a way which is very ad hoc puts you in a position where you have to do that over and over again. It's not much better than Excel. So the process of getting to the point where you can actually focus on the things that you're supposed to for work and get out of having to report on stuff that you've done to people who don't really know what you do, is creating a new infrastructure for that. So it's creating the plumbing and the architecture for it. There's also gap analysis and change management. So in order for you to get to a point where you're better, there must be something about Maximo that you don't like. I don't know what it is, but it's something. There's a gap out there. And getting to the point where you can identify what that gap is and moving beyond that gap is your goal. In some ways, you can probably do that by working better with Maximo, and in other ways, you won't be able to. You'll hit the limitations, and at that point, that's when you have to think outside of the box. You might be using analytics, you might be using Tririga, you might be using something else altogether. But that's the gap analysis part, and the change management comes with how do I bring that back in to this sort of structure that we have to manage every day. I like to say one other thing, that remember, every time that you add a field of information, it's something that somebody has to maintain. So it's best to identify somebody has already maintained that and create a process by which you can get that on a regular basis, and it's not your job, because you already have a job. And the last is governance, data preparation, and stewardship. So that goes into, and it feeds from that concept. Data governance is really boring stuff, but done right, what it does is it makes you an effective organization, and it allows you to excel at this and put down your gap and focus on what you actually are getting paid to do. Questions?
So, we obviously have done this for a while, and you have a good feel for it. Here's what your thoughts are on null data, because Watson doesn't like it. As soon as Watson runs into a null field, it thinks it's bad data. In my industry, null is not necessarily bad data. Null can be very significant. It can be very significant that there's a piece of data that's not there, and it can mean something. You agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I think there are situations when a null is a good thing, and I think there are situations when a null needs to either be, there's a lot of different conditions that can come out of a null, right? So you can say null can't be ignored, null can be ignored, null can't be replaced by a zero, null can be replaced by a zero. And with each one of those conditions, if you're actually looking at a governance map, you're suggesting what should I be doing, right? Those are gateways. And just like approving a budget or anything else, when you come to these stage gates, that's a stop, what do I do next? So if you're looking at a data process and you're actually connecting two systems, that has to be part of your data process to say, what do we do when? And all four conditions in that circumstance need to be addressed. And you need to know, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And part of that is the experimentation part too. If you haven't gotten in and said, well, what's it do to my chart? What's it do to what I'm reporting, communicating? Then you don't really know what the impact of it is. It could be completely innocuous, or it could be masking, the next Challenger explosion or something. So understanding your risk factor associated with why you might do each one of those four things is definitely part of data governance, and more in that boring side of things. Happy to talk about it with you at length. Everybody in here, by the way, has my business card. It was, I think, included in all of your swag bags. So feel free to contact me with any questions when this is all through. Any other questions?